like to introduce the first panel of the day, which will be on war disease. So I guess some questions were linked to that. So we have a short last-minute change. So Karl Negler will not being able to join us. He was stuck in the plane because of the strike of Lufthansa. So Rafaèle Tordjman, who just arrived perfectly on time, will join us on the panel. So the panel will be, and its panel is proudly sponsored by Sanofi as well. And so Hans and the other panelists can join on stage. So Hans Herklots is a managing director of Capricorn, his own communication agency. He was a former VP of communication of Unicure, and he will be moderating this panel. Hans.
Thank you, Philip. Okay, it was interesting that Philippe started with the true history of biotechnology, 3.5 billion years. I also want to start with a little history, but not as long, and go back to 1983. In 1983, as many of you know, the Orphan Drug Act was put in place in the US. And the Orphan Drug Act and followed later by the EMA with a similar legislation, really stimulated the development of orphan drugs for rare diseases. I think prior to the Orphan Drug Act, there were about 10 orphan drugs on the market, and now we have hundreds. But the space has changed considerably. I mean, we have here a great example in Karen Aiach from Lysogene, Paris, Boston, right? Which is really a company that develops an orphan drug as it was originally intended. Christian from Sanofi Genzyme, of course, representing a company that is currently the most programs in the whole industry in the orphan drug space under development, but also very much in line with the Orphan Drug Act. And Rafaèle from Sofinnova, who as an investor looks at these projects from a completely different angle, because the investor, despite what, or not despite, but as Philippe indicated, they have to make a return. Some fail, some succeed, but of course you hope that more succeed. Today we are in a space where 10 of the largest orphan drugs in terms of revenues, 8 of them are oncology drugs. They're not the drugs that were originally intended. And companies have been very smart at finding loopholes. It's part of their job, I guess, to make money. But Amgen, for instance, which was one of the first big biotech companies after Genentech in California, their first products, Epogen and Neupogen, which were cancer drugs and renal insufficiency drugs, those drugs were orphan drugs. So in one way, the Orphan Drug Act kickstarted the whole industry. If it wasn't for that act and the EMA follow-on, we wouldn't be here in these numbers. The biotech industry could fit in a very small cafe on the other side of the boulevard. So it has stimulated the industry, but we are sort of running into a wall. That is sort of the provocative thesis that I would like to hand over to our panelists here. Perhaps Christian from Sanofi Genzyme, you could start with your angle on this issue, because this is something that is probably very pertinent to your business every day.
So, yeah, in fact, when Genzyme was founded 30 years ago, I think that will be also an answer to one of the questions for Philippe a bit earlier about is there an end to the capacity of the society to pay for drugs for orphan diseases? Just to remember that 30 years ago there was very few companies working in that space. That's 15 years ago when I was a young, yes, I was young 15 years ago. In that industry, there was health authorities, patients were all complaining about the fact that companies were looking after drugs for, you know.
A little bit higher. The
Sorry.
mic, a little bit.
The mic, I should know. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so no, you should increase your. That we were looking for drugs with, we are looking for billions in drug for large diseases. For the last 5 to 10 years, yes, there is probably a reorientation of investment from big pharma or in R&D or in buying companies in the space of rare disease or orphan drugs in oncology. But if we look, like Philippe said, if we look at 20 or 30 years from now, after the fact that there will be a peak in that mood, in a way, I'm more concerned about the fact that there will be less investment or less research in the field of rare disease, and that the risk is more in the control of price and a decrease in the ability to find investors in that space than in seeing rare disease treatments being a threat for health insurances. You said there is 100, I think there is 500 treatments for rare disease that are used in France on a bit more than 7,000 rare disease, less than 150 are specifics. We have 5 to 6 new treatments coming which are really registered every year. So I think that when talking about the real rare disease space, I would say we will never be a threat for the community. I'm sure that Karen will agree with that. Is oncology a threat? I think that there is also rare cancers. And when coming to these products that are developed in a rare disease indication, I would say, and then come with broader indication, that's the real threats, I would say, for payers. I think that in most of the countries there is abilities to control that. The payers are more and more trained in challenging us, I would say, on how to explain our prices or investments. I don't see that the world will come. I think that the world, as it was for the last 4 billion years, the world will head up to the new offer. And so the offer will so.
Karen, perhaps, I mean, you're from a completely different ecosystem, maybe not, but I mean, you're leading a relatively small company, quite successful, and developing a really important therapy. You have been, I mean, everybody, I assume, knows your story, so we're not going to go in there, but you have been, you needed to fight for capital, for investment, and the picture that I just painted and what Christian says, how has that affected you in attracting capital to build your company?
The fact that we are in the orphan drug space?
Yes.
I think it was a plus, actually. So my investor is right next to me, so we will ask her. No, I know. That's the duo. No, I think it was a plus, but it was not the fact that we were in the orphan drug space per se. I think that convinced the investors. It's a bunch of different things. So not my R&D background to get back to Philippe, because obviously I had none, but people around me had some. So that's a story, a team, a project. And yes, back in 2013, when Sofinnova joined the company, the orphan drug space was really hot, and I think it still is, actually. As I mean, I agree with Christian that the pricing of orphan drugs per se is not a threat to the healthcare systems, and I think we'll make the case. The rare diseases advocates are more and more listened to. You know that last week or 10 days ago, the first committee for rare diseases was installed within the United Nations at UN. So the voice of patients with rare diseases is absolutely loud, strong, and I think we will protect ourselves. And there is something also which is of great importance. It's the fact that when you have a very severe rare disease, you have no other choice than trying very innovative therapies. And we are bringing innovation on the table. So I think that it deserves some sort of high prices, and that the community at the end recognizes it especially when you compare the prices of drugs, of orphan drugs, to the real cost, the real burden of patients with a rare disease on healthcare systems.
Okay. Rafaèle, as an investor, you see so many business plans every day, every week, fighting for your attention and your money. What is Sofinnova's approach in the rare disease space? What specifically are you looking at? And how do you see it develop going forward?
Actually, we are not looking at rare disease as a investment thesis. We are looking at disease with a need, with what are the competitors, what are the drugs on development on the market, and then indeed when we found like Lysogene opportunity with a rare disease, a very severe one, and the potential to develop their platform and get other programs and other indication, rare indication, then yes, it is part of the investment thesis. So we are not looking to, okay, we don't have allocation of investment for rare disease, so it's really the disease per se. And when we look at indeed then orphan disease company like Lysogene, we are convinced because of these issues of pricing and reimbursement that we should go into disease very severe with life-threatening issue, because even with this type of disease, is the society going to continue to pay for all of this? So we are convinced that it has to be very severe to justify a high price, and without being too much provocative, but for ophthalmological disorders, for rare disease, if you get just a little bit better outcome, then it is going to justify a high price. So it's one of the reasons why we invested in Lysogene. Is it's as Karen said, orphan is a plus. But it's not the main reason. Obviously, one of the main reasons investing in Lysogene is the team and the team that Karen has built with her, able to deliver not only on the first program, but now on the second one and soon on the third one, so with several indications. The other way we have to look at orphan disease, and it's what Gilles was saying, is to look at the side door to enter to the big door. So rare indication that will allow to target much bigger one, and we have an investment in MedDay, a French-based company as well, who started actually looking at metabolomic targets for CNS disorders, starting by rare optic neuropathy, and finally today they are developing their product for progressive multiple sclerosis with great outcome and already some early access program for this patient with a big need.
Okay, thank you. Karen, you mentioned something about greater patient involvement. I was involved personally with the first program in Pompe's disease in the 90s. In the Netherlands, and interacted a lot with patient organizations and the patients and the parents themselves. And I know how heart-wrenching this can be. And we've just seen, and don't know if people in the room have followed it closely, in the US, the approval of Exondys by Sarepta for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Sorry. After an 11-hour AdCom meeting in front of the FDA, where patients, their parents, their neighbors, everybody was there. And this is a 12-patient trial where the efficacy is seriously in doubt. In fact, the scientists at the FDA said there is no sign of efficacy, but still they were overruled and it is approved. So the patient involvement was clearly important, and it's going to play in other fields as well. How far should that go? Because is the Sarepta, is that a model?
I myself cannot comment on the Sarepta case. I mean, it's really special, and I didn't see the data myself, so I cannot say anything. What I can say is that your question is how far should that go? It has to go to a reasonable, how can I say that, situation. What we are doing at Lysogene is not, we are not thinking of, maybe we'll have bad data one day and we'll go to the FDA and the EMA with patient advocacy groups. What we are doing is taking their perspective into account right now on a very objective basis to include the expectations of patients and, in our case, their families, to take their expectations into consideration to make sure that the endpoints that we will pursue in our registration study, which starts next year, will make sense to them. And what we've done as well is to enter into an early dialogue with health technology assessment bodies, like the Haute Autorité de Santé en France or NICE in the UK. So we were selected last year to be a pilot for a consortium of 9 HTA bodies. And the question was for us to elucidate what was of importance to them, so that when we reach the market with our product, it is considered as a product that has to be paid for at a certain price by the health technology assessment bodies. So my nature leads me to try to think about potential problems before we start launching a program rather than at the end of it. So that's how I would look at that.
Sure. But I mean, that's more from the development side. It's not the science side, as Philippe correctly said. We can't predict science. Anything can happen down the road. So it's more an integrated approach where all these parties come together to anticipate potential hurdles along the road. Christian, I mean, I assume that you followed the Sarepta story closely, and Sanofi Genzyme did, because it has a big impact on the space overall. What are the thoughts at Sanofi Genzyme about this kind of drive and dynamic, which is pretty unique?
First of all, I would like to say that without patient support and patient advocating, there would have not been Genzyme. Genzyme has really been built with patients, with the mother of the first kid for which the treatment for Gaucher, which was not bio-produced at that time, but extracted from old stories. I was not there at that time, I have to mention. So, but just to say that without that mother and the GM of Genzyme at that time, that's pioneer company which is now developing and researching for rare disease for 30 years, would have never begun the story. So if you consider that for a very long time patients had nothing to say, the fact that we are entering in a moment where maybe sometimes patients are pushing a little bit too far, I think is a major advance in what we should see in a democracy or health democracy compared with what it was in the past. So, of course, we will find examples where maybe they are advocating for something which is not the answer to their hope. Still, I think that they deserve to be heard. And when we are talking about small companies trying to develop, we can also say that the money, our money, could help. We do that in France through ATUs, for example, could help also finalize the demonstration of efficacy we are looking for. Because you said 12 patients in some diseases, it's not a lot of patients. In some others, it's a lot of patients. It's sometimes 50% of the patients you will find in Europe. So having a clinical trial with 12 patients is already a demonstration. And so we can also support the fact that it's an investment we do for the future, not only for those rare disease patients, but maybe to save what we were defining as fraternity in a way. Yeah. So we also save us when we do that. Yeah. And when you talk about Lysogene as a company built with or patients or etc., I think most of the people working in the rare disease space at the beginning, they have a reason, and when they had not a reason at the beginning, at the end, they have a reason to stay.
About the number of patients, by the way, Prosensa did a trial with 260 patients, so it's not that the patients weren't there.
When we came, I remember 3 years ago when I came to discuss the reimbursement or rediscussion around the dossier for Serdelga, which is a second-line therapy in Gaucher. We had a bit more than 450 patients in the clinical trial, which is probably one of the biggest trials. And the payers said, that's interesting as preliminary results. So, you know, the question of how many patients you should put in a clinical trial to convince payers and health authorities, in rare disease, it will never be enough, and we all know that we will not be able to do more. So let's find a way to admit that it's a specific area, and we have to live with those specificities.
Sure. So, would you like to add something, please?
Yeah, no, I wanted to add that, you know, even earlier I said the orphan, we don't look at orphan as an investment thesis. Nevertheless, and you could hear that in the comments here, is that obviously there is a know-how that is built around and for orphan disease development. And that is obviously a very big leverage then for making a success and deploying to other diseases. So, and you could hear that, you know, with the patients, but with all the stakeholders actually until the development.
So, one topic that we spoke about before is a little bit further down the road. Lysogene succeeds in bringing its first therapy for Sanfilippo A to the market. We'll get the exclusivity of the orphan designation, will be an orphan status, and will enjoy its position on the market alone for 7 years in the US, 10 years in Europe. Now, it seems very difficult for another company to come in. Maybe it's just starting today, 7, 10 years from now, and bringing a competitor, a follow-on product, which happens in other therapeutic areas all the time, of course, to the market, because the patient population is relatively small. It will be tied to this one company, but in the end, for patients born long after today, this is going to be a challenge because maybe they won't have the best therapy that would otherwise be possible. So how can we, is there a solution to this predicament? Maybe Christian first, because this is something, because Sanofi Genzyme is so advanced and has had products for many years on the market.
I'm gonna say that. First of all, when you have demonstrated that a product is efficient in a very rare disease indication, like we did with Cerezyme in Gaucher, coming with a second generation and try to prove, not that he's doing better, but even that he's doing exactly the same thing, is, from a methodological point of view, a real challenge. Because when you want to show that in hypertension a product is better than another, you have a clinical trial with 15,000 patients. So demonstrating that your second generation will do at least as good as the first generation is the first challenge. Still, because we are Genzyme and we think that it's maybe from an ethical point of view, when you think about spending your money, good to go on developing in the areas where you are specialists, you already know, so you have the best chance to succeed, was one of the strategic pillars of the company. So we have a second generation product now commercialized in Gaucher. We are developing a second one in Pompe disease, where Myozyme is a mid-good product, I would say. And we are also developing an oral therapy for Fabry disease, and we expect it to be also successful in the most severe form of Gaucher. So yes, because we are leader in that market, because we have big teams and a great knowledge, we are now able to develop second gen bets. And to come back to the question about value-based medicine, which would be, of course, ideal if we want to protect our ability to get the just price, I would say, in the future. The problem is that to do value-based medicine, you need to have data, and we don't have data. We are not able to collect data. The health authorities don't know how to do that. We have registries, but registries generally are developed at the moment you come with a treatment, so you don't know exactly what was the natural history of the. And at that moment, the real based or real life data are really seen by health authorities as preliminary, I would say. So, yes, ideally, we should, as a community, I mean, and maybe in France, PNMR3, the third national plan for rare disease, will be an opportunity to stress the fact that we need to develop tools, and we need to obtain from the centers treating patients that they use those tools, that we collect data, and maybe sometime we will be able to do value-based medicine, which will help secure the prices and then develop second-generation products.
Sure, but that's within Sanofi Genzyme.
Yep.
My point was, you are able, because it's a rare disease, to pretty much ring-fence that area, and it's going to be impossible for any other competitor with maybe a better technology, a better approach to come in. So how?
No, it's not to look at Shire has developed products behind Genzyme almost all the time in the same space or same area when the technology was better known. No, they have not succeeded in having better products, of course, but they try. They hardly try. I don't say it's impossible, but you're right, it's difficult. And if the first product is good, and when you look at the incredible need there is for 7,000 rare diseases where there is no product, at least is that not good that other companies are looking in other spaces and tracking investment or the pioneers? I don't know. That's a good question.
Karen, maybe in line with this topic, but a little bit different, is something that I just discussed with Rafaèle as well. I think there are 7 companies developing Sanfilippo A therapy. This is a question for Rafaèle later as well, as in, how do you deploy capital in the most efficient way? But I assume that you know these companies, you know the groups that are working on other approaches. It seems that for a rare disease, to have 7 companies running for the finish post is not maybe the best way for patients. It's very Darwinian, one will win, but a lot of capital will be destroyed along the way. So how do you think about it? Because you, I think, were motivated to start this, and before you started the company, you probably talked to other companies how to solve this problem, and then you thought, screw, I'm going to do this myself. So how do you look at this?
Okay, so first, I think that there might be 7 companies involved in Sanfilippo syndrome, but not in Sanfilippo syndrome type A. That's okay, but that's a detail. And by the way, one of our competitors who precisely told me like 10 years ago, we will not invest in Sanfilippo A right now, and that company was and is Shire. They were the only ones to have an interest in Sanfilippo A because they had rights on the enzyme, on the IP. And they said, we are going to develop an enzyme replacement therapy approach at some point, even though we believe that gene therapy would be better. But in terms of business model, our business model is to do an enzyme replacement therapies. So we may put that on our agenda at some point. They did it, and up to now they failed. They stopped their trial this summer. So apart from them, yes, a few companies or programs have blossomed after we started our gene therapy program in MPS IIIA. And the question that you are raising should be turned to them. Why are they doing something in MPS IIIA in a space where there is so much more, there is so much to do in other diseases? I have no responses to that. It's probably a sort of gregarious effect that we've seen in Gaucher as well. So many people have worked on Gaucher here and there. It was just amazing. And when I started, I said, but why are these people working on Gaucher, all of these, and not on Sanfilippo syndrome? So and now it's a few years afterwards. Here we are. The point is Lysogene is and will remain the most advanced company. And you know, the important thing is to reach the finish line, and that's what we are thinking of every day. And we've been doing that for a few years now. So that's a sort of obsession, and we'll stick to that. It's not to just create a company, it's to reach the finish line and treat the patients.
Okay, Rafaèle, just one last, yeah, please.
So yes, so,
then we can take questions from the room.
Indeed, if we take the example of Sanfilippo A, clearly Lysogene was and still today the most advanced one. So was when we invested 3 years ago. Shire at that time was in an ongoing program that just failed and stopped recently with the enzyme replacement therapy, and then others came. It's not only the fact that Lysogene is more advanced, is that in terms of differentiation, because within the same type of technology of gene therapy, then you have different type of administration, different type of construction of vector, etc., etc. So this clearly we still think that Lysogene is the best one. Now, why they do that? Yeah, it's probably the same phenomenon than the Gaucher, to go to the one that had been almost proven. Maybe we could add that orphan disease, and I don't have the numbers for that, but maybe Gilles has that. Is that when we have numbers for a specific orphan disease and you don't have treatment, it's one thing. But then when you have a treatment for patient, that physician and patient will look for that. So you will have more diagnostic of the disease. That's just good sense, I think. But I don't have the numbers to show that. But I think as an ex-physician, I think it's clear that if you have a treatment, then you could propose, you have more diagnostic. So ultra rare could become rare, or rare could be not maybe frequent, but at least with less rare patients. So that's one of the maybe answer why they come to that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We can take some questions from the room. Please. Orphan diseases, come on guys. It's interesting what you said about this herd effect. Actually, you see a similar, yesterday was a meltdown in the market in CAR-T with Juno's results. They all go after CD19. They all do, barking up the same tree, each in its own way, of course. Any questions from the room? A finance question, Karen. You have a fantastic syndicate of VCs backing you, but you need to move forward. And I understand you just opened the doors of Lysogene in the US. What is the next plan? Is a public listing in the cards, or is that too confidential? An IPO, I mean.
It's confidential, but what is true is that we need more money, so we'll have to find a way to to raise more money, to use it very wisely to bring the company to the next steps. We do have a second product in our company now for another rare lysosomal storage disease with a heavy CNS involvement. We were the first ones to commit to that disease, but it seems that in certain labs, it's starting, vibrating like that, and suddenly that disease becomes of interest, but no one would have bet on it like 1 or 2 years ago. So to bring these programs forward, even though there are strong synergies between the two, it's important to get additional funding. So in the life of a company, there are different stages. Lysogene was originally funded by the founders, patient groups, family office, friends and family, a friend and family fund. So that was the first years, the early years of the company. Then we had 3 major European investors joining the company in a Series A, which is actually a Series B, but whatever, with Sofinnova, the French Public Bank of Investment, and Novo, a Danish fund. And the next step, yes, is to get additional financing. What will be the exact route, we cannot comment on that, but hopefully it will be not not too far from now.
Good. Rafaèle, no, just one addition, because I spoke to Carl 2 weeks ago, and he made an observation that I thought that sort of, I was not shocked by it, but a little bit sobering. He said GIMV, their fund, is not investing, you remember, Karen, in orphan stories, companies, if there's not a US angle. Meaning the US market, of course, which is often, for small companies, almost an afterthought. They start thinking about that too late. The NPV just doesn't bear it out. Now, with Lysogene setting up shop in Boston, you know, whatever route they take, if they ever go public, an American listing will probably be more likely than a European listing. The valuations just are better there, the knowledge of the investments, et cetera, et cetera. How do you look at the public markets, Europe versus the US?
The public market, you say?
Yes.
Yeah, so
for companies like Lysogene.
Yes, so I think a US angle is always very, very important, and particularly in orphan disease, because you want, it's orphan, so you have to target all over the place, actually. And Lysogene is not only thinking about and developing in Europe and US, but also in Brazil and envisaging in China. So you have to be, as a, you know, for orphan disease, it's orphan, so you have to target all of this. Then in terms of financing, I mean, we have several examples, and we are, you know, between US and Europe listing, we are kind of opportunistic or in the good sense, i.e., you know, when the market was completely not like the last years on the Nasdaq, we listed, for example, DBV Technology, again a French-based company, on Euronext first, and then they've done a second listing in the US. Although we were thinking to go directly in the US, particularly because DBV is developing a product for peanut allergy, and peanut allergy is US market. So nevertheless, the market was not, it was March 2012 again, and it was not like the last years. So we have also a company in medical devices, not rare disease, but that US company, and the medical device public market was not good and is not good, and we listed the company in France and Ireland. So it's a way to be opportunistic, to find obviously cash and to continue to grow the company, but also in terms of liquidity, then thinking about a second listing.
Christian, just one last remark, because we need to wrap up.
No, just to maybe to give other diseases reasons to spend the money. I think rare disease is probably one of the places that are still protected in Europe. On any other market than rare disease, I would say that without the US market, where the margins are made, there is no way. Still, when you are in rare disease area, thanks to the generous healthcare systems we have all across Europe, there is opportunities, and I think that this is a space where you can consider the European market as a growth market. Maybe I would like to thank Philippe. No, just thank you for two things. For inviting me, and my dream is now true. I am at that stage with two nice women, you know, in Moulin Rouge, so thank you very much. And one remark, stop being proud of being young. It will not last.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Please, a round of applause for the panel.